I think what people like is a piece of craftsmanship on their wrists. They really you recognize the time and effort and energy and intentionality that went into the design and production of an automatic mechanical watch. And if you have a beautiful exhibition case back like yours, you can see those inner workings, right? And that adds an extra layer of fascination.
Hello, culminators. Thank you once again for joining me at this most August occasion. I'm Ron Coleman, of course. Why do I assume that just because someone is a culminator that they know that I'm Ron Coleman, right? You may not know Paul Brown, but you may know his internet identity. He's uh, he's a watch company. You may very well know, and you should know Paul, as the Wasson Watch Company, the watch company that knows what time it is. And those are some of the things that it stands for. So as you can see from this list of things, this is a guy's going to get himself into trouble on the internet. And I want to talk to Paul about that because it's interesting to see someone put a brand into the culture wars. Paul, how are you? Nice to talk to you again. We've been on a couple of panels before.
Yeah, I'm doing great, Ron. How are you?
All right, thank you.
Good.
Um, you're a watch guy. The first thing I said to you when we first met on on the internet was, "I'm a watch guy." I used to represent Rolex on their anti-counterfeiting work, and I came to develop an interest in a passion, although never the budget for fine watches.
Yeah.
Um, what's your watch story?
Yeah, I've always loved watches. I remember my first watch was a Timex Explorer that my parents gave me when I was 5, 6 years old, which and this will date me, but that was around the time of Desert Storm. And it was a sort of desert tone watch, so various shades of khaki and brown, and I just loved it, right? And I've loved watches ever since, but I didn't really discover automatic mechanical watches until around 2017, 2018. And I was really fascinated by them. I'd started a number of businesses in the past, really more side projects, but I got fixated on this idea of like, I want to start a watch company. I want this to become the main thing that I do. And that began the journey that we're on today.
Just to be clear for folks who don't understand this, when Paul refers to automatic mechanical watches, he means watches that wind themselves. They have a works in them, so flywheel. So as you move, the watch winds itself. And the reason that everyone in the world doesn't know that today, especially anyone who is much younger than I am, certainly younger than Paul's, is that the industry of fine watchmaking was almost destroyed in the 1970s
Yeah.
by a little development called quartz, quartz watches. All of a sudden, there was a way to have a really accurate way of keeping time that didn't. Now keep in mind, mechanical can include an automatic watch or a wind-up watch. Uh, Quartz required neither; it required a battery. What was it that when you learned about the world of automatic watches said like there's something irrational, right? There's
Yeah.
about it.
Yeah. It's something, maybe it just feels real. And I think that the mental state of people now is different than it was in the 50s, 60s, 70s. There was a time where technology is automatically better. If you go from the old way to a new way, the technology is like, oh, I want to use this new technology. And there are elements of quartz that are an improvement. As you say, it's cheaper. That quartz watches keep great time, you know. So there's a lot of little things there. But the whole industry kind of moved on because here was this cheaper thing and the again 50s, 60s, 70s technology is better. But I think what people like is a piece of craftsmanship on their wrists. They really you recognize the time and effort and energy and intentionality that went into the design and production of an automatic mechanical watch. And if you have a, beautiful exhibition case back like yours, you can see those inner workings, right? And that adds an extra layer of fascination.
Especially when I mean, one of the most interesting developments. I don't want to go down a rabbit hole here, but one of the most interesting developments of the last few years in this field has been that for years, what you owe one of the issues in counterfeiting work was that you could get a watch that looked exactly like, let's use Rolex as an example, exactly like a Rolex, be made of all legitimate, precious metals and with jewel, all the best, but the quality was never quite there. And of course, it was also against the law to stick the word Rolex on something that Rolex didn't make.
Right.
But the Chinese, the masters of reverse engineering, and now we're in the computer and the AI and the laser era. They are making fake Rolex watches that are 99.99% there.
Yeah.
And so to some extent, that authentic experience that you're talking about is in and of itself being undermined by the replica.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
you say you started a few businesses before that. You were like one of these serial entrepreneurs.
I mean, it really is, it would be fair to just call them side projects, right? I feel like they would have had to have been more successful than they were to call myself a serial entrepreneur. Because I'm talking about like a lawn service. I had a gun store that I started in the DC area in Northern Virginia in 2013.
Is that where you're
Um,
from?
no, I'm not. I was born in Arkansas. My family moved to Texas when I was 10 in the mid 90s. And then I was in the DC area from 2010 to 2014 after I got out of the Marine Corps. And I went to work at the Defense Intelligence Agency up there. And so the gun store was a side business as well. I had a little office space that I rented out and did like by appointment for gun purchases, and I also did concealed handgun classes, training for folks, which that was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed that.
So it's not surprising to me that a watch guy would also be a gun guy.
Yeah, tons of overlap in those fields. You've got, watches and guns can both be as expensive as you want them to be, right? And then they're just these mechanical devices. There's something about that. And then there's a military angle as well. Like that what really interested me in the mechanical watches in the first place was learning about some of the storied histories of, the Rolex Submariners and the Omega Seamasters and some of these other watches, really the advent of the dive watch was for military operators, right? And so at learning those histories is what kind of pulled me in to begin with. And so when you throw guns in the mix and the military background and the watches, they all just sort of converge there.
When I was a kid, the war movies would always have before the commandos would begin their mission, they would say, "Okay, everyone, let's synchronize our watches." And
Yeah,
I had no idea what that meant. What do you mean?
yeah,
You all have watches on, they have their time on it. No, it was understood that most people had ordinary watches. And what is an ordinary, like, what is the precision issue here? The precision issue is accuracy.
yeah,
And most, you know, well, today what we would have called in those days, a dime store watch, a regular old, plain old mechanical watch, it would be understood that you would lose or gain several minutes a day. That was fine. Just that
right.
every day you had to get it right. So you go to the town square where there's a clock that's probably of higher quality or whatever it was. So all the commandos had to make sure that maybe they hadn't looked at their watches for a couple of days, even though they still had them on their wrist. Let's make sure that we're all on the same time zone. Okay, enough watching the Watchmen. So, Paul, you were in the Marines after high school,
Yeah, not immediately after, but about less than a year after I graduated, I ended up going to Marine Corps boot camp.
and you spent quite a lot of time there.
5 years, 2005 to 2010, and I ended up being what's called a cryptological linguist. So I was a Spanish linguist working in the field of signals intelligence.
It's all coming together for me now. Okay. Yeah, okay. So this is you're the thinking man's watch guy. Of course, most
Yeah,
watch guys are thinking men.
yeah,
Uh, um, you and I encountered each other uh, on X,
yeah.
where you have gotten yourself into the mix a little bit. When did you start getting involved in social media?
Yeah, so 2018, I started the business, started my pages. I didn't even consider a Twitter page when I started it because I had a personal Twitter page at that time and I was heavily shadow banned, right? I'd said the right combination of Christian and conservative things on there. And it's just like, I'm not, not even gonna bother. And then Elon Musk bought Twitter, what was it, 2022 or was it like October 2022? Something like that.
Yeah, yeah,
Whenever he
right.
bought it, shortly thereafter, I started my Twitter, now X, account for Wasson Watch. And I really didn't know how to utilize it either from a business perspective. I didn't necessarily understand what the business case for its use was yet, but I had the account and I really started increasing my posting on it in 2024, like middle, Q2, Q3 2024. And I just posted kind of the things that occurred to me to post. Some of it was watch related, but most of it was about politics. It was about culture. It was about religion. It was about values and morals. It was because I had started from the very beginning that I started the company. I knew that I wanted to be a values first company. I wanted to be outspoken about our beliefs boldly.
So you seem to have, to have a really well-defined uh, view of the world. And I guess you've kind of always been. I mean, you're from Arkansas and Texas. Okay, let's call a spade a spade.
Yeah.
When you tell me you're from Virginia and then you say you're from oh yeah, I've got a store in the DC area. That doesn't add up, right? So first I thought, okay, he came up from real Virginia, perhaps, but no, it's even better than that. So it was obvious to you, and this is actually I mentioned to you when we were doing sort of the pre-interview, and I say sort of because I don't usually do that. I'm much too lazy, and you know why I'm not so lazy today? It's because I'm busy as hell. Take that to the bank.
Yeah.
So one of the things I mentioned to you was that you're putting your brand on the line. I mean so, and as a brand lawyer, not as much as I once was, but I do a lot of trademark work and I do a lot of reputation based legal work. And we see how allergic a lot of companies are or were until the woke era
Yeah.
to getting themselves. And so you really move things in the opposite direction. Of course, there are a handful of other companies that have done that and they've had mixed results. But to you, it was obvious that that's how you do it.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a whole like could do kind of a psychoanalysis here theoretically, but like my dad is a very principled guy. He works in missions in ministry overseas. He's actually overseas right now, and he also was a
Evangelical.
evangelical, yes, evangelical Christian. He trains pastors. I won't say exactly where, but overseas, and he also is a Marine Corps infantry officer, right? So there's
Folks,
some
this is a real American that we're talking to. I just want to make it real clear, okay? This is a real American. We're talking, okay. So how many generations of Marines are you? It's just
we're just my brother and I are just second generation. My dad had an uncle who was in the Marine Corps as well, but I have grandparents and great grandparents and so on served in, Army, Air Force, and you're going all the way back to like the Revolutionary War. We've got family that served in the U.S.
wild.
military or
Cool.
the constitutional, the colonial military, and I've got uncles and cousins who served. My brother served both in Iraq and Afghanistan. He was an artillery enlisted guy and officer. I was just enlisted and then did my time and got my honorable discharge and moved on. But um, he's very, very principled and he lived that. I think it's one thing to have opinions, it's one thing to have outspoken beliefs, and it's one thing to live by those outspoken beliefs, to kind of put your life on the line for those things. And so I had that example from a very early age.
So those
Um,
and your father did that and does that in two different ways, right?
yes,
First of all, being a Marine officer,
yes,
I'm sorry, doesn't really get more putting your beliefs on the line than that, but also as being a missionary.
yeah,
Again, I mean, you didn't want to tell us where he is doing his work. That tells the story right there.
right,
He's obviously, I say obviously, one of the things Jeremy has heard me talk about before, why am I putting this on Jeremy? Some other people must listen to this program also. The conservative movement, in order to achieve what it claims are its goals, needs to integrate, in my opinion, that mentality of living the conservative values,
yes,
not just standing for them. Because if you we see how negotiable so many people's virtues have become. If you truly that person, that doesn't happen.
yeah. It's the age-old adage that actions speak louder than words, right? The Proverbs talks about a man who I'm trying to remember the exact wording, but it's basically that talk leads to nothing, right? And you need to go and do it. And in the New Testament, it talks about don't just be hearers of the word, be doers also. And so we have these principles that are biblical, that you need to go and do the thing, and that talk is cheap. So that you're absolutely right. That's something I would like to see more. See people living by the principles that they say they have, assuming they're good principles, right?
Right, exactly. Unfortunately, we do see a lot of people living by their principles, nihilism and destruction, and and rage and anger.
Yeah. So I had probably some nature and nurture there, right? If my dad's predisposed to, uh, being very, very heavily principled, and I was raised that way, you have these, sort of convergence of things. Um, and I think a lot about this. One of the things that it says, and I think it's in First Peter, is talks about Christians as stewards of the mysteries of God would be one way to describe them. And I think that if you have God's word and you know it and you know it to be true, you've got this understanding of the living Almighty God of the universe. And you look at the left, you look at all of these Fortune 5 companies that are willing to espouse or embrace these positions on DEI and LGBTQ stuff and global warming and anti-guns, and just go down the list, boldly share their positions on these issues, whether they genuinely believe them or not. And I think, man, how much do I, who have possession of the truth, who has a living relationship with the living God, um, how could I not be 10 times more bold than them? How could I sit here and just say, oh, I don't want to speak the truth because of potential or very real negative consequences to that. When Jesus said, don't fear those that can destroy the body, fear the one that can destroy the body and the soul in hell. Right. And it's just like, hey, do I believe that there is an eternal realm where God is present, and he's present here, but do I believe that the God's promises are true, or do I just give lip service to them? But really, I need to do what I need to do here and now to get what I'm gonna get, and hopefully that God stuff works out on the back end.
And the public, the popular culture does so much to push back against that.
Yeah,
People of faith are always depicted as hypocrites, secret criminals, secret perverts, secret, immoral people. They just can't believe someone like J.D. Vance believes what he says. He lives what he says. these these are values that are not merely check boxes, but rather, and as a Jewish person, one of the things about Judaism that shocked the ancient world was that how all encompassing it was. Because among pagans, unless you were a priest, that was a job, you did your thing, and then you made you went to the temple and brought sacrifices. But the Torah came and said, God is interested in every detail,
Yeah.
every detail. It all matters. And I'm not sitting here saying, and I've mastered every detail. Oh, God's happy with every detail, in my life. No, no, not at all. But I do acknowledge, and I think this is part of the problem that it's not. It's hard for Americans to get behind this because we're so
Yeah.
used to being independent. We resist hierarchy. Protestantism is about an independence of mind, sola scripturum, a scriptura. It's hard to balance that.
Yeah. No, there is a balance there. There's a lot to unpack there. And I think that's the interesting thing about Protestantism is there is this tension. There is this element of independence, the independence of thought, free thought, but it is tethered by the sola scriptura. And I think that the American propensity is to lean much more heavily on the independence element, right? Sola scriptura is a connection to the law, to written things, to truth. And I mean, frankly, our whole government system owes itself to sola scriptura, that we're lex rex, not rex lex. The law is king rather than the king being the law. That is something that I think we can directly point back to sola scriptura for. Whereas the alternative being the old Catholic tradition is not sola scriptura. It's the Pope, has parity, if not authority, over the meaning of scripture and what he says. And so in that case, you have a man, an individual man who is in charge, right? And can say, well, I'm going to add this to the Bible, or I'm going to say that the Bible means this or that it doesn't mean that, even when it's clearly stated. And so anyway, that, we're kind of covering a lot of different things there. But something I wanted to say, about the Torah, about the Tanakh, what the Christians call the Old Testament. Um, it's clear if you've read the Bible and you take what it says to be true, that God has blessed the Jewish people, the ethnic Jewish people, that there's a blessing there for them. And one of the things I believe very sincerely is that one of the ways that God has blessed the Jewish people is the gift of the Torah. It is the gift of the law, because a lot of the ways in which objectively Jewish people have excelled, I think are owed directly to this sort of cultural adherence to the Torah, where not everyone is observing the Torah very, very carefully, right? Across, the Jewish culture, the Jewish diaspora, if you will. But everyone, I think almost everyone within the sort of Jewish culture has some level of base understanding of what's in the Torah, and it affects the way that they live their lives, even if they're not really conscious of that. And that,
Well,
that is a great blessing.
I thank you, and I think I agree with you. What we see is that there are ingrained cultural ways of living and of looking at the world and of attaching meaning to life and passion and an interest in justice that Jews who left observance of the Torah nonetheless historically prided themselves on retaining.
Yes.
What we find, however, is that once that observance ceases for a couple of generations, those mores become less meaningful.
Yes.
The attachment, because they're not being refreshed by interaction with the Word of God,
Yeah.
and it's becoming, you want to talk about one guy in Rome calling the shots. How about your alcoholic father? being a source of transmission, or he might not be an alcoholic. He might be the greatest saint and surgeon who ever lived, and he wrote a book on jurisprudence, and he's this great intellect, but he's Freud, okay, but he's disconnected himself. What we find is that those people no longer live Jewish values, and people are always asking me, Paul, why do so many Jews vote Democrat? Why are they all
Mm,
liberal? And I have to explain to them that their Jewish ethnic identity, notwithstanding, their worldviews do not reflect Jewish values.
right.
They're not busy with Jewish values. And among
Yeah.
people who are still attached to observance and to Jewish, Torah scholarship, they're 90% plus conservative and
Yeah.
Republican.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot of what I think a lot of Christians that aren't necessarily as familiar with Judaism don't realize is that there's actually a lot of overlap and similarity between what you could call progressive Christianity and progressive Judaism, right? And
Well, there's
we
no
have the
difference between
same thing.
Unitarianism and Reformed Judaism.
Yes, absolutely.
It's the
It's
same
the same,
church.
it's the same thing, same territory. And so there will be people that might sort of fixate on like, why are these Jews voting Democrats? Like, why are there so many Christians or, so-called Christians who vote Democrat? It's the same thing. It's like, hey, do those people believe that the Bible is absolutely true and as a guide for their lives? No. Well, that's why, that is the same thing.
Well, I'll tell you something, when you bring it up in those terms, something I often say to people is that I'll use you as an example in this case. Paul Brown and I have more in common theologically than Reformed Jews and I.
Yeah.
But but Paul Brown believes in Jesus Christ, and Reformed Jews don't, right? But Reformed Jews don't believe in anything. Okay.
Right.
Not only that, Paul believes that Jesus Christ believed that God gave the Torah to the Jewish people,
Right.
literally,
Right.
and he meant it. And those people don't.
Yeah.
I don't want to say that now we're merely negotiating over details. They're big
Yeah.
differences, but those are gigantic points, and it's also true of Islam. Now, what the heck they went and did, and riffing off that is we're not going to get
Yeah.
into that.
Yeah.
But except that it does raise the question. I mean, as someone whose family has been in this country from go, um, you obviously have an appreciation. I mean, you are able to act and feel patriotic because you obviously believe that the values of this country are consistent with the spiritual values that guide your life,
Yeah.
correct?
Absolutely.
That's an amazing thing to say.
Yeah.
That's not something, that's something not something to be taken for granted. Do you have any idea how we deal with this massive influx of Muslim culture and thinking? I don't even want to call it theology. We're not having a theological debate, but a lot of there are a lot of people, some probably more Catholic than evangelical, but plenty of Christian people who like to start up. There's no such thing as Judeo-Christian. That's preposterous. It means you don't understand Christianity if you don't understand that. But
Right.
as a Jew, I recognize that this is a country that was founded on Christian conceptions of how a person goes about living his life. And the First Amendment that protects freedom of worship and freedom of religion in general is premised on a Christian conception of what that religion might look like.
Yeah.
Now we're being challenged by a very, very different worldview of what it means to be a faithful, a believer of God. How do you think we reconcile this?
Yeah. No, that's a great question. Something I've been thinking about. I know a lot of people have been thinking very hard about. And it's something we want to consider carefully. Because, you could come out with all this bravado and just say like, oh, just get rid of them all, just throw out the whole book and get rid of all the Muslims, however you want to put that. We need to be very careful about that. We should question, maybe some of our interpretations of the Constitution. Sure, we can question that, but let's not be too hasty. I think it starts with understanding what Islam is. And you're absolutely right that the context that the Constitution was written in was from a Christian perspective. They didn't expect there to be 4.5 million Muslims in the United States in 2020. Like that's an insane prospect for the founding fathers to even consider. They didn't expect mosques being built in the United States, I don't think. Again, I don't think it's something they ever even considered. But I think we have to understand that Islam is a political movement as much, if not more so, than it is a religion. And we also need to understand that the things which Islam explicitly supports, things that Islam explicitly even tells its adherents to do in the Quran and in the Hadiths and so on, are illegal things. There's a lot of illegal acts that are part of the expectation of being a good Muslim. Now, could you be a bad Muslim and not do those things, or a moderate Muslim? Or I saw someone use the term, Gad Sad said the other day, like a cafeteria Muslim, you pick and choose. Sure, but if the fundamental nature of this construct is that if you follow it through the way that you ought, that it leads to legal acts, we need to be asking the question of, okay, well, then does membership in this or does active involvement in it, uh, does that look like being involved in organized crime? Maybe
Well,
would be one way
here's
to
the
put it.
problem. I mean, we made a decision as a society, and it doesn't go back to 1789. It goes back to the middle of the 20th century, that we would tolerate not only all religions but all ideologies.
Yeah.
Because what you're describing can obviously be said of communism as well.
Yeah.
And nonetheless, it is not illegal to be a communist.
Right.
You can believe that violent overthrow and all the intersectionality and all the things that those folks praised Stalin and Pol Pot for,
Hmm.
you can believe that.
Yeah.
I I'm pretty sure this is one of Michael Knowles's kind of common tests. What would Ben Franklin, what would Thomas Jefferson say? He would say, well, by that test, hell with them. No, they go. But you acknowledge, and I think that this is my position too, as much as I like to agree with Michael. Um, this is where we are, and neither evangelicals nor Jews want to be in a place where government is going to regulate ideology, because then we're
Hmm.
going to look like England.
Yeah.
And you also mentioned something really important, which is the illegality aspect, because I was actually about to serve up this point, which is that a lot of the things that people object to about what's going on with, I don't want to talk about, again, Muslims, but rather political Islam
Yeah.
and the activism of political Islam in this country. If we would merely enforce existing laws, and I'm not talking about hate crimes. In fact, if it were up to me, I would remove as unconstitutional
Yeah.
all aggravating components of crimes because of there being hate crimes. If you hit me on the head with a shovel, I really don't care. That's because I got a big nose and I talk with my hands. Okay, you hit me on the head with my with a shovel, and oh, it's only because you only want to steal my money. Okay, you're not going to spend as long as jail. No, my brains are all over the floor. That shouldn't
Yeah.
make a difference. But what's happened to the enforcement of law in this country because of racial and ethnic politics and favoritism is the problem. If we would return to just basically, I mean, we're living in a world today, Paul, where, unlike the 60s, Democrats did not take the position, in the 60s, Democrats did not take the position that police are an inherently bad thing.
Yeah.
Or laws where law enforcement officials are going to be given the privilege of deciding which laws will be enforced and which ones will be waived. We've seen a real meltdown on really basic components of the society. Forget about theological uh, consensus, basic social consensus on how do people live together in a society.
Yeah. No, absolutely. There's a death cult that is wearing another death cult like a skin suit, if that makes sense. You know,
Oh,
you've got the left, right? And Islam has a parasitic relationship with the left. The left is already a death cult because, this abolish the police, abolish prisons. Though a side note, our criminal justice system could be improved, but their answer is just abolish prisons and replace it with nothing. People just choose to be good because we're nice. Um, yeah, tax everyone and everything and distribute all the money and abolish marriage and the family and everything else, right? That's already a death cult. That's already just a basket of insanity. And then Islam comes along and it sees weakness and it sees this element that is subversive to society and is degrading society. Because what a society, the strength of a society are its core beliefs, right? The core of its culture. And the core of the culture of the United States is Christianity. And the Judaism is very, very um, compatible with that because Christianity and Judaism, come from the same source. They both have this biblical basis, this biblical understanding, this shared history, and so on. Um, so if you can just get people to stop believing in God, to stop following God, to stop seeing his laws as true, to stop seeing the fundamental elements of the universe as we know it as being true, well, then that society becomes weak and then you can overtake it. And so the left will continue to be something that Islam works with and fuels right up until the day that they can overtake it and they no longer need it. And then it will just be cast aside and, we can have Sharia law and all the rest.
that is the reason we're having this conversation is so people like you and I can share our thoughts with either similarly minded people or people who maybe haven't quite thought about these issues the way we have. Um, it's, there's been this tremendous democratization of communications and uh, the ability to share ideas and to share falsehoods and to
Yeah.
share lies that we as a society have to, really reckon with. But at least we can have conversations like this that hundreds or maybe thousands of people will share all or part of in a way that was impossible when even you, young man, were growing up.
Yeah. Yeah. No, the whole world has changed. I liken it to the printing press. Um, some people, I think most people are probably just not thinking about the details of history and timing of things. But the printing press had been around, I think, for around 50 years when the Protestant Reformation started. Right. So Martin Luther is a Catholic priest. He starts studying the Bible really carefully and seeing inconsistencies between what the Bible says and what the Catholic Church is teaching at that point, selling indulgences and other things like that. So he goes and he writes down his 95 theses, his 95 arguments, nails them on the church door, and it goes viral in the terms of that day, in that people are able to make copies really quickly and distribute them to other towns where copies are made and distributed. And the establishment, which is the Catholic Church, was unable to react in time. It took a long time for the message to get back to Rome, back to the Vatican, and then they had to sit down and talk about it and discuss it. It was about a year between, if not a year or more, between when he nailed his 95 Theses to the church door and when the Catholic Church officially responded. And by that point, the ideas that Martin Luther had written down were in every town in Germany. right? And so that's kind of the dynamic that we're seeing with things like X. As you said, the democratization of communication is you've still got these old dinosaur giants trying to communicate the old way. And it's always so funny when a large company or even a government entity will try to make a press release to spin something. And you've got the entire sort of atmosphere on X and everywhere else. Everyone's discussing it, and no one believes their spin. And they're just over there trying because they used to have the bully pulpit. It didn't used to be where you and I could have conversations freely and openly about the topic, even though we've never met in person. We just have a similar way to view it. And so you're absolutely right. It's changing the world very quickly. And people need to recognize that and put it into their calculus.
One final question in this timeless discussion has to do with your watches.
Yeah.
What's your favorite Wasson watch?
You know, I'm partial to the black dials, and we have the Wasson automatic field watch with the black dial, and we have the Dominion dive watch with the black dial. And I'm wearing the Dominion right now, and it's got a carbon fiber rotating bezel. It's 300 meters water resistant, sapphire crystal. It's got an ETA 2824 movement, and it's got a US flag on the front. Yeah, you're gonna pull it up. That's the automatic field watch. Um, but both of these watches have been passion projects. The field watch has Micah 6:8 on the back. Man, what does the Lord require of you but to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God. Whereas the dive watch has a reference to Genesis 1:28 on the back, where God commands Adam and Eve to be fruitful and multiply and to take dominion. And the name of the dive watch is
Oh,
the
that's the
Dominion.
Dominion.
That's the background there with that. Um, and both those every Bible verse is important, speaks you know endless truth. But I love the idea of just reminding people that your goal is not to just sit there and just let life happen, let it pass you by, let things go on. You need to take dominion, right? You need to go out there and do something with yourself, and that is a universal command to all people.
And to acknowledge that being a person made in the image of God is
Yeah.
different. We're not
Yes.
merely animals that happen to have less hair on us. It's different. There's a purpose, there's meaning. And thank you very much for culminating with me a little bit about all these things. Great talk
Yeah.
to you, Paul.
Thanks, Ron. You too.